It's just the light coming in from the window. And that's comes in even through the glass, so. Alright?
So that's the point of glass, Charlotte. No.
Chapter 6.
Are you recording?
Yes.
Okay.
Lord of the hold, your charge is sure, in thick walls, metal doors, and no verdure. Threadfall was well past, the flamethrower crew safely back in Half Circle Hold before anyone missed Manoli. Sella did, because she didn't want to have to tend old Uncle. He had had another seizure, and someone had to stay by his bedside. That's about all she's good for now anyway, Sella told Mavi, and then hastily demurred at her mother's stern look. Well, all she does is drag about, cradling that hand of hers as if it were precious. She gets off all the real work. Sella let out a heavy sigh. We've enough trouble this morning, what with someone leaving the hold doors unfastened and thread falling. Mavi shuddered at the thought of that brace of horrors. The mere notion of thread cascading down, able to wriggle within the hold, turned her stomach. Go find Manoli and see that she knows what to do in case the old man has another fit. It took Sella the better part of an hour to realize that Manoli was neither in the hold nor among those baiting long lines. She hadn't been among the flamethrower crews. In fact, no one could remember having seen or spoken to her all day. She couldn't have been out hunting greens like she usually does, said an old auntie, thoughtfully pursing her lips. Threadfall was on directly we'd our morning claw. Didn't see her in the kitchen then either, and she's usually so good about helping, one-handed in all that she is, poor dear. At first, Sella was just annoyed. So like Manoli to be absent when needed. Mavi was a good deal too lenient with the child. Well, if she'd not been in the hold in the morning, she'd been caught out in the thread, and that served her right. Then Sella wasn't so sure. She began to feel the first vestige of fright. If Manoli had been out during Threadfall, surely there'd be something left that Thread couldn't eat. Gulping back nausea at that thought, she sought out her brother, Alemi, who was in charge of the flamethrowers. Alemi, you didn't see anything unusual when you were ground checking. What do you mean by unusual? You know, traces? Of what? I've no time now for riddles, Sella. I mean, if someone were caught out during Threadfall, how would you know? Whatever are you tacking around? Manoli's nowhere in the hold, or the dock, or anywhere. She wasn't on any of the teams. Alemi frowned. No, she wasn't, but I thought Mavi needed her in the hold for something. There! And none of the aunties remembered seeing her this morning, and the hold doors were unbarred. You think Manoli left the hold early? Alemi realized that a strong, tall girl like Manoli could very easily have managed the door bars. You know how she's been since she hurt her hand, creeping away every chance she gets. Alemi did know, for he was fond of his gawky sister, and he particularly missed her singing. He didn't share Yanis's reservations about Manoli's ability, and he didn't honestly agree with Yanis's decision to keep knowledge of it from the harper, especially now that there was a harper in the hold to keep her in line. Well, Sella's prompting irritated him out of his thoughts. I saw nothing unusual. Would there be something if Thread did get her? Alemi gave Sella a long, hard look. She sounded as if she'd be glad as if Manoli did get threaded. There'd be nothing left if she'd been caught by Thread, but no thread got through the bending wings. With that, he turned on his heel and left his sister, mouth agape. His reassurance was curiously no consolation to Sella. However,
Some thread did get through, though.
Where?
The cave.
So, where's the cave?
But Manoli is safe. Oh, it's at the water.
And what did the dragon stop doing at the water?
Thread checking because the thread is dead.
Because the thread will fall on water. Exactly.
And considering the high tides, it's dead.
Yep.
Except for those few poor fire lizards.
Yeah. Well, but they were flying over the ocean. However, since Manoli was so obviously missing, Sella could take some pleasure in informing Mavi of this fact, adding her theory that Manoli had committed the enormous crime of leaving the hold doors unbarred. Manoli? Mavi was handing out sea salt and spice root to the head cook when Sella imparted her news. Manoli? Yes, Manoli. She's gone. Not been seen, and she's the one left the whole doors unbarred, with thread falling. Thread wasn't falling when Yanis discovered the doors open, Mavi corrected Sella mechanically. She shuddered at the thought of anyone, even a recalcitrant daughter, caught out in the silvery rain of thread. Alemi said no thread got through the dragons, but how can he be sure? Mavi said nothing as she locked up the condiment press and spun the rollers. I'll inform Yanis, and I'll have a word with Alemi too. You'd better take care of old uncle. Me? Not that that's real work, but it is suited to your temperament and ability. Yanis was silent for a long moment when he heard of Manoli's disappearance. He didn't like untoward things happening, such as the whole doors being left unbarred. He'd worried about that all during the fall and the fishing after the fall. It wasn't good for a seaholder to have his mind diverted from the task at hand. He felt some relief that the mystery had been solved, and a keen annoyance and anxiety about the girl. Foolish thing for her to have done, leave the hold that early. She'd been sulking ever since that beating. Mavi hadn't kept her busy enough to make her forget that nonsense of tuning. I've heard that there's plenty of caves in the cliffs along the coast, Elgian said. The girl probably took shelter in one. She probably did, said Mavi briskly, grateful to the harper for such a sensible suggestion. Manoli knows the coast very well. She must know every crevice by now. She'll be back then, Yanis said.
She didn't know the cave.
Give her time to get over the fright of being out during Threadfall. She'll be back. Yanis found relief in his theory and turned to less distressing business. It is spring, said Mavi, more to herself than to the others. Only the harper caught the anxious note in her voice. 2 days later, Manoli had not returned, and the entire Seahold was alerted to her disappearance. No one remembered seeing her on the day of Threadfall. No one had seen her since. Children sent out for berries or spider claws had encountered no trace of her, nor had she been in any of the caves they knew. Not much point in sending out a search, said one of the shipmasters, mindful that there was more surety of catching fish than finding any trace of a foolish girl, particularly one with a crippled hand. Either she's safe and doesn't choose to come back, or she could be hurt, thread scored, or broken arm or leg, said Alemi, unable to make her way back. Shouldn't have been out without letting someone know where she's gone. The shipmaster's eyes moved toward Mavi, who did not catch this implied negligence on her part. She was used to going out for greens first thing in the morning, Alemi said. If no one else would defend Manoli, he would speak up. Did she carry a belt knife or a metal buckle? Asked Elgian. Thread doesn't touch metal. Aye. We'd find that much of her, said Yanis. If Thread got her, said the shipmaster darkly. He rather favored the notion that she'd fallen into a crevice or over the edge of a bluff, in terror at finding herself out during Threadfall. Her body'd wash up around the Dragonstones. Current throws up a lot of sea trash down that way. Mavi caught her breath in a sound very like a sob. I don't know the girl, Elgian said quickly, seeing Mavi's distress, but if she did, as you say, stay out a good deal of the time, she'd know the land too well to go over the edge of a cliff. Threadfall's enough to rattle anyone's wit, said the shipmaster. Manoli is not stupid, said Alemi with such feeling that everyone looked at him in surprise, and she knew her teaching well enough to know what to do if she were caught out. Right enough, Alemi, said Yanis sharply, and rose to his feet. If she were able and of a mind to return, she'd have done so. Everyone who's abroad is to keep a sharp eye for any trace of her. That includes sea as well as land. As seaholder, I cannot in conscience do more than that under the circumstances, and the tide is making. To the boats now. While Elgian did not actually expect the seaholder to institute an intensive search for a lost girl, he was surprised at the decision. Mavi even accepted it, almost as if she were glad of an excuse, as if the girl were an embarrassment. The shipmaster was obviously pleased by his seaholder's impartiality. Only Alemi betrayed resentment. The harper motioned to the young man to hang back as the others filed out. I've some time. Where would you suggest I look? Hope flashed in Alemi's eyes. Then as suddenly wariness clouded them. I'd say it's better if Manoli remains where she is. Dead or hurt? Aye, Alemi sighed deeply, and I wish her luck and long life. Then you think she's alive and chooses to be without hold? Alemi regarded the harper quietly. I think she's alive, and better off wherever she is than she would be in Half Circle. Then the young seaman strode after the others, leaving the harper with some interesting reflections. He was not unhappy at Half Circle Hold, but the master harper had been correct in thinking that Elgin would have to make quite a few adjustments to life in this sea hold. It would be a challenge, Robinson had told Elgin, to try to broaden the narrow outlook and straighten thinking of the isolated group. At the moment, Elgin wondered if the master harper had not vastly overrated his abilities when he was unable to get the sea holder or his family to even try to rescue a blood relation. Then, shifting through the tones of voices rather than the words spoken, Elgin came to realize that this Manoli posed some sort of problem to her hold beyond the crippled hand. For the life of him, Elgin couldn't remember seeing the girl, though he thought he could recognize every member of the hold. He'd spent considerable time now with every family unit, with the children in the little hall, with the active fishermen, with the honorably retired old people. He tried to recall when he'd seen a girl with an injured hand and had only the fleetingest recollection of a tall, gawky figure hurrying out of the hall one evening when he'd been playing. He hadn't seen the girl's face, but he'd regretted her slumping figure he'd recall her slumping figure if he saw it again. It was regrettable that Half Circle Hold was so isolated that there was no way to send a drum message. He could signal the next dragon rider he saw as an alternative, and get word to Bend and Weir. The sweep riders could keep their eyes open for the girl and alert any holds beyond the marshes and down the coast. How she could have gotten that far with thread falling, Elgin didn't know, but he'd feel better taking some measures to find her. He had also made no headway in discovering the identity of the songmaker, and Master Harper had charged him to have that lad in the Harpercraft Hall for training as soon as possible. Gifted songmakers were a rare commodity, something to be sought and cherished. By this time, Elgin understood why the old harper had been so cautious about identifying the lad. Yanis thought only of the sea, of fishing, of how to use every man, woman, and child of his sea hold to the hold's best advantage. He had them all well trained. Yanis would certainly have looked askance at any able-bodied lad who spent too much time tuning. There was, in fact, no one to help Elgin with the evening task of entertainment. One likely lad had a fair sense of rhythm, and Elgin had already started him on the drum, but the majority of his students were thick fingers. Oh, they knew their teaching spot on, but they were passive musically. No wonder Paterian had been so effusive about the one really talented child among so many deadheads. Too bad the old man had died before he received Robinson's message. That way the boy would have known that he was more than acceptable as a candidate to the Harpercraft Hall. Elgin watched the fishing fleet out of the harbor and then rounded up several lads, got meat rolls from an auntie in the hold kitchen, and set off on, ostensibly, a food-gathering mission. As Harper, he was acquainted with them, but mindful that he was the Harper, the boys regarded him with respect and kept him at a distance. The moment he told them that they should keep their eyes open for Manoli, for her belt knife, if they knew it, or belt buckle, the distance widened inexplicably. They all seemed to know, though Elgin doubted that the adults had told them, that Manoli had been missing from the hold for some days. They all seemed equally reluctant to look for her, or to suggest to him possible areas in which to search.
The children missed her teaching.
It was as if, Elgin told himself with frustrated anger, they were afraid the harper would find her. So he tried to regain their confidence by telling them that Yanis had suggested that everyone who went outside the hold should keep their eyes open for the lost girl. He came back with his charges to the hold, with sacksfuls of berries, greens, and some spider claws. The only... Oh, the dog's very loud.
This has been the interruption episode.
Callie!
This has been the interruptions episode.
It has. The only information the boys had volunteered about Manoli during the entire morning was that she could catch more spider claws than anyone. Hold on, guys.
Elliot claimed he was going to eat the red button.
I know you know. As it turned out, Elgin didn't have to signal for a dragon rider. The next day, a bronze wing leader came circling down to the beach at half circle, greeting Yanis affably and asking if he might have a few words with the harper. "You'll be Elgin," said the young man, raising his hand in greeting. "I'm Natan, rider of Leoth. I heard you were settling in." "What can I do for you, Natan?" said Elgin tactfully, and Elgin tactfully walked the bronze rider out of Yanis's earshot. "You've heard of fire lizards?" Elgin stared at Natan in surprise for a moment before he laughed. "That old myth?" "Not really a myth, friend," said Natan. Despite the laughing mischief in his eyes, he was speaking in earnest. "Not a myth?" "Not at all. Would you know if the lads here have spotted any along the coast? They tend to leave their clutches in beach sands. It's the eggs we want. Really? Actually, it isn't the lads who've seen them, but the Seaholder's son, not the fanciful sort, although I didn't really credit. He saw some around the rock crags known as the Dragonstones, down the coast some ways. Elgin pointed the direction. I'll go have a look myself. But this is what's happened. Fnor, Brown Cant's rider, has been injured. Natan paused. He's been convalescing at Southern Hold. He found and impressed, and again Natan paused significantly to emphasize his last word, a fire lizard queen. Impressed? I thought only dragons. Fire lizards are much like dragons, only smaller. But this would mean... And Elgin was lost in the wonder of that meaning. Yes, precisely, Harper, said Natan with a wide grin. And now everyone wants a fire lizard. I can't imagine Yanis Seaholder wasting the time and energy of his men looking for fire lizard clutches. But if fire lizards have been seen, any cove with warm sand might just hide a clutch. The high tides this spring have been flooding most of the coves. Too bad. See if you can't organize the Hold youngsters to search. I don't think you'd have much resistance.
I don't think they'd search a cave for fire lizards.
None at all. And Elgin realized that Natan, dragon rider though he now was, must have been susceptible to the same boyhood designs on fire lizards that Elgin had once planned. When we find a clutch, what do we do? If you find one, Natan said, fly the signal banner and the sweep rider will report. If the tide is threatening, put the clutch in either warm sand or warm tides. If they should hatch, you did mention they can be impressed? I hope you're that lucky, Harper. Feed the fledglings. Stuff their faces with as much as you can eat. They can eat, talking all the time. That's how you impress. But then you've been to a hatching, haven't you? So you know how to go about it. Same principle involved. Fire lizards. Elgin was enchanted with the prospect. Don't impress them all, Harper. I'd like one of the little beasties myself. Greedy? No. They're engaging little pets. Nothing as intelligent as my Leoth here. And Natan grinned indulgently at his bronze, who was scrubbing one cheek in the sand. As he turned back to Elgin, Natan noticed the line of awed children lining the seawall, all eyes on Leoth's action. You'll have no lack of help, I suspect. Speaking of help, Wing Leader, a young girl of the Seahold is missing. She went out the morning of the last fall and hasn't been seen since. Natan whistled softly and nodded sympathetically. I'll tell the sweep riders. She probably took shelter if she'd any sense. Those palisades are riddled with caves. How far have you searched? That's it. No one has bothered to. Natan scowled and glanced at the Seaholder. How old a girl? Come to think of it, I don't know. His youngest daughter, I believe. Natan snorted. There are other things in life than fish. So I used to believe. Don't be so sour so young, Elgin. I'll see you come to the next hatching at Bendon. I'd appreciate that. I suspect so. With a farewell wave, Natan strode back to his bronze dragon, leaving Elgin with an easier conscience and the prospect of some relief from the monotony of the Seahold.